Welcome attendees to the Oklahoma Compost Conference virtual series that we're doing this year. My name is Mark Walvord. I'm a staff member at the University of Central Oklahoma in Edmond, Oklahoma, and a member of the Oklahoma Compost Conference Planning Committee, many of whom are joining us as attendees, a couple of whom we have speaking to us today and joining us for tech support. So shout out to the Planning Committee for all the work this year to keep this going. The Oklahoma Compost Conference started in 2015, not too many years ago, for the purpose of bringing together communities and businesses to discuss how compost can benefit all of us in the state of Oklahoma and also the environment. So for the past 5 years, our annual conference has taken place in person, as you might imagine, and attendees have ranged from local government, staff people to municipalities, construction, solid waste, and individuals. We're very proud to be able to continue that tradition of having a diverse array of attendees at this year's virtual series, and this is the first of that virtual series, so we're so happy that you've decided to join us. I did want to start off by saying a big thanks to our sponsors that you saw rotating through those slides, especially Eleva Soils, Keep Oklahoma Beautiful, City of Midwest City, Prairie Dirt Solutions, in addition, Oklahoma City Beautiful, Ideal Homes, and our in-kind sponsors, Oklahoma Department of Environmental Quality and the University of Central Oklahoma and Fertile Ground Co-op. So thanks to all of them for helping make this possible. Some quick housekeeping rules or technology rules, I guess. And again, you probably saw these on the rotating slides. But just to remind you, or if you haven't used Zoom webinars before, down at the bottom is where it usually is, or find where your options are for Zoom webinar. There should be a Q&A feature. And so we're going to be taking questions from you all. You can type them in using that Q&A feature throughout this session today. And we'll have Tanner, one of our committee members, compiling those questions so that our speakers can leave some time at the end to answer some of those. So please stick them in there. You can also chat, not with each other like you can in a normal Zoom, but you can chat with the panelists, that is our tech team and speakers. So we're gonna reserve that kind of for technical problems or issues that you're having. Feel free to ask some of those technical questions there in that chat feature that you can find in Zoom down at the bottom. When we practice this over the last couple of weeks, occasionally people get slow internet and you drop off. And I would just tell you to continue trying to rejoin. It should let you in. This session will go till at least 1 o'clock or a couple minutes after. So if you for some reason get kicked off from slow bandwidth, continue with that link that you're using right now and it should let you back in automatically. May just take a couple tries. So this session, let's get down to it. October 1st at noon is on the small scale of scaling the Compost Mountain. And this we're getting to hear some great information from 2 people who are again on the committee and are happy to join us today. Especially happy is Josh Campbell because it's his birthday. He joins us from Oklahoma State University Extension for Oklahoma County as one of their agricultural educators. He'll start us off and then we'll turn it over to Malarie Gotcher and brings us expertise as a water conservation specialist for the city of Oklahoma City. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Josh.
All right, well, thank you, Mark. It is an honor. There's no place I'd rather be on my birthday than hanging out with folks talking about compost. And so it's an honor to get to kick off this virtual series that we're doing during the month of October and to really start the process as we think about scaling this Compost Mountain. And so as I share my slides here, give me just a second to get that put up. Okay, so for those of you that are experienced with composting, a lot of this will be some refresher. For those of you that are new to composting, I hope that this encourages you to think about beginning composting at whatever the scale that is right for you, whatever method is a best fit for you. And so over the next few minutes, I was told I have about half an hour, which for me is really hard. I'm used to talking much longer than that. So I will do my best to stay on time. But over the next half hour or so, I'm gonna just have some fun and throw some things at you that if you have experience with composting will probably be more of a refresher. If you're new to composting, I hope will challenge you to get excited about composting. But either way, I think we have some good information to share. And my goal is to really set the pitch for Malarie who is going to talk to us about some of the applications and uses of compost when we talk about how that pertains to soil health and utilizing compost at the home level. So I borrowed this slide here from the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. It is a graphic that shows that about half of all municipal waste, all the garbage that we throw away that goes to landfills or other forms of municipal waste management, is compostable. So when we talk about composting at the small scale, at the household level, there's a big opportunity to divert a great amount of waste that's coming out of our households. And so for me, as an extension educator here in the Oklahoma City metro area, one of my big passions and one of my focus areas is getting people composting at home, whatever size or scale. If you have an apartment or a backyard, there's a compost method that'll work for you. So when I'm talking about composting, I always like to define it. No matter what I'm talking about, I like to come up with some sort of definition that we can all operate on. We all kind of have different pictures that come to mind when we think about composting. And I believe that whether we're talking small scale composting or later in this series towards the end of the month as we start talking about industrial scale composting, the processes that are at play and the way we think about composting is really the same. All we're doing is harnessing nature's way of taking organic material and turning it into humus, to usable soil material that can improve our soils and make our soils more productive. And so it's a natural process. And so composting is simply harnessing that natural power. And I like to remind people that the workforce that is doing all the work in composting are these folks right here, those macro and those micro organisms. These are the workforce. So when we want to talk about composting successfully, you can get real fancy and talk about your compost recipe and all the inputs and things that you would do into a compost pile. But from the home scale perspective, what we're trying to do is create an ecosystem and an environment that is going to maximize the environment for these creatures right here to do their work. That's what we're talking about. The other thing I like to remind people is I don't have a problem with the word dirt when it's used appropriately, but I like to joke and say dirt is a 4-letter word, and yes, it is literally a 4-letter word, but it is really a swear word in my opinion when you are talking about it when you should be referring to the word soil. And the reason I say that is because soil is alive. Soil is with organic material, those macro and microorganisms, it's what has all that plants need to grow. And so when we add compost to dirt, that's when we get soil. That's what makes soil, is that life that compost gives it. And I stole this quote from some master gardeners, but I think it's really pertinent and something I share a lot. A poor gardener grows weeds, a good gardener grows vegetables, and a great gardener grows soil. The other thing, when we think about composting, I think this is where a lot of people get hung up. I think a lot of people think that they can just pile up organic material and then in a very short amount of time, poof, they're going to have this beautiful workable soil. And sure, that can happen, but that takes some planning, some management, and really a system in order to accomplish that. So there are really two ways to think about composting. If you're a lazy composter, I would say you're doing what probably more of a cold or static composting. This is going to require minimal effort. You're going to be putting materials together and perhaps not getting to a hot temperature. You're not really thinking about maximizing the moisture and the airflow and all the things that speed up that compost process. However, over time, you will eventually get to a finished compost. It's just going to take much longer. Most people, when they picture composting, are thinking about this hot composting. And so this is where some people get disappointed, is when they don't think about the steps that are necessary to achieve hot composting, and then they don't get the results that they're hoping for. So hot composting really is a process that's going to take the right balance of carbon, nitrogen, inputs, moisture, airflow, all of those things. And next slide here. Okay, so from the backyard composting perspective, if you want to achieve hot composting, you really need to think about this 3 feet by 3 feet volume, 3 feet cubed. If you don't have a pile that is 3 feet deep, 3 feet tall, and 3 feet wide, it's very hard to achieve any form of hot composting that's going to lead to fast decomposition and breakdown of this material that you want to turn into compost. And so if you maximize this process, you can achieve compost in a matter of just a few weeks. It's going to depend on how actively you're managing it and what your materials that you put into it were. Static composting, on the other hand, the first one we talked about, is going to take you a matter of months. It could be on the shorthand 6 months if it's material that had small particle sizes and was going to more readily break down to natural decomposition, and then it could take as much as 2 years or more for a lot of larger materials to break down in a static type system. This is an old graphic, but I think it's a good picture. So I stole this from the University of Arizona Extension, and it shows you all the things, so if you've got browns, you've got greens, you've got water, you've got air, and you've got those macro and microorganisms. And when they are in harmony, when they're in the right balance, that's where compost really happens, and happens efficiently and effectively. There's a lot of confusion, especially when folks are getting started with composting at the home level, about what can safely be compost. And I think people put way too much thought in this. I'm more of a compost is an art as much as it is a science type camp of thinking, in that you have to get to know your method and your system of composting. But in general, there are a lot of materials, things that come out of our landscapes, things that come out of our kitchens that can be composted. And when we talk about carbon rich or brown materials, we're mostly talking about these dry materials, usually older materials. If we're talking about plant materials, straw, hay, things that have been dried out and have aged. The nitrogen rich or the green materials are going to be the fresher, the wetter materials. And that's an easy way to kind of think about it. And like I said, there are many, many methods for composting. There are dozens and dozens, and I listed several here, but this is just scraping the surface in terms of the methods and the styles of composting that could be done at the home scale, whether it be 3-bin, or a wire mesh, or tumblers, or if maybe you're in an apartment, you're doing a vermicomposting bin or a bokashi bucket. There are endless options when it comes to composting at the small scale. And I think this is where it becomes confusing and somewhat overwhelming for people. There's maybe you try a composting style and you don't have success, it doesn't fit your needs, and you get frustrated, you think you can't successfully compost. And what I encourage people to do is to do a little bit of research before they just jump into any composting method. And so what I like to suggest people do, I found this quiz, and I'm constantly referring people to this, but this is the City of Saskatchewan, Canada. If you go to saskwastereduction.ca/quiz, you can actually take a simple quiz. You'll go to their website, you'll take a simple quiz that will actually generate results for you in terms of what compost method might be the best for you to use at home. You don't have to put your email in. You can just simply click here and take the quiz, and you'll walk through a series of questions. I took some screenshots here that show what you might experience. So it'll ask you if you prefer hands-on or hands-off, how much space you have, do you plan to utilize things from your landscape or mostly food scraps, and then it will spit out a method that they suggest would be a good one for you. You can see here I walked through and it said perhaps a medium-sized compost bin or a large 3-bin compost bin. So I encourage any of you that are seeking to get started with home composting, maybe you're looking at trying out new methods, to take that quiz and see what results you get. Like I said, there's a lot of different methods that are out there. This is a very common one, the 3-bin system. You start rotating, you start filling material on the far right. Once it's filled, you move it to the middle. It will probably shrink in volume. By the time you fill up all 3 bins, you have this 3rd bin filled, you generally have some form of finished compost. Tumblers are common in small landscapes. They come in all shapes, sizes, and forms. And I think that they're a great way to compost. They have their drawbacks though, and there are certainly some disadvantages with this, and we'll talk about some of those in a moment. But for some people, they love compost tumblers. All right, vermicomposting. This is one of my favorite methods because it can be done in very, very small spaces. People who live in apartments, who have mobility issues, can utilize vermicomposting, whether it be a bin that you purchase, like you see here in the center. This is one of those 360 vermicompost bins that I have at my office. We have built some of these bins in some of the classes that we teach at our extension office, and you can just slowly over time feed food scraps from your kitchen, and these worms are very prolific digesters and will yield you just some amazing vermicompost, and it's a great material to top dress around houseplants and in other settings in gardens. And so just a great material, great for folks in small spaces. If you're wanting to get started with outdoor vegetable gardening, you might consider doing something like this lasagna or sheet composting. You can see here in the bottom right, this is a picture that one of our master gardeners provided for me, and she actually just layered compost and let it break down over time, and then she added another layer and some soil, and then planted right into that, and was able over time to kind of beat back some of the turf grass here and get started with her vegetable garden. But it can be done in other methods in between rows as a way to kind of compost in place. This is a picture taken from the former regional food banks gardens, and they filled their raised beds doing this lasagna method. Trench composting, I think, goes hand in hand with the next method that I'm going to talk about, which is bokashi. And it is really a way for folks who have a little bit of outdoor space, but maybe don't have the time or the space to do a larger composting bin. They can simply find a space out in their landscape, their garden beds, dig a trench. Usually you want to dig about 1 foot deep to kind of limit any pests that might attempt to get into it. And then you're just simply burying food scraps. So you can do this with fresh or I like to freeze food scraps and then throw them in. You don't seem to have as much of a pest issue when you do that. Or you can combine this with this bokashi method, which I'm not, I haven't had a lot of experience with the bokashi method, but my understanding is you're basically fermenting these materials in a bucket. So you're putting both meat and vegetable food scraps, and then you're layering that with this yeast or this material that's going to basically ferment these things so that they start to decompose. They don't have a terribly pungent smell. And then when you have the opportunity, you can then go out into your landscape, into your gardens, and you can bury those materials. So that's a very popular method for folks with limited space as well, popularized in Japan. Keyhole composting kind of emerged out of Africa, Southeast Asia, as a method of combining raised bed gardening and composting in one. Essentially, you're putting a cylinder compost bin into a raised bed, and you're filling it from the center, as you can see here in this top right picture. And as that compost material breaks down, it leaches and it feeds the raised beds. And so you can see some pictures here from different places around the state where this method is being used. Like I said earlier, there are advantages and there are disadvantages to every type of composting method. And we don't have a lot of time to dig into this today and really unpack the advantages and disadvantages of each. But I encourage you, whatever method you're considering, just do some research. Take that quiz that I suggested and think about the advantages and the disadvantages that come along with each method, and find the method that is going to be the best approach for you. The factors that affect the composting process, we'll really quickly go through these. Carbon and nitrogen, that balance of carbon and nitrogen is important. Also, the size of the particles you put into your pile, the amount of moisture that your pile or your system has, and the amount of airflow that it gets. The nice thing about this is that these are all things that we can control. And so as we optimize our control of these 4 factors, that's where we can speed up this composting process. Carbon and nitrogen are found in plants. They're found in everything, but in plants specifically, the carbon is what gives the plants their cell wall strength. That's cellulose, and so it's going to be in the more tough woody material of the plants is where you're going to find the most concentration of that. Typically, when I think about nitrogen in plant proteins, I'm thinking about the leafy, softer tissue parts of the plant. And so when we're thinking about optimizing the composting process, you hear people talk about optimizing this carbon and nitrogen ratio, and it's just an estimation. And I have to focus on that. It's an estimation. I think people put too much emphasis on this sometimes. It's an estimation of the dry weight of the two. And so certainly if you're composting on a commercial scale, you're going to want to start to think about your recipe and plan for these things. But and so you'll hear people talk about this 30-to-1 ratio as people start to build recipes. But for most homeowners, people composting at the home scale, if you simply follow the rule of thumb of trying to maintain a 3-to-1 volume of brown to green materials, you're going to have success with your composting. But really quickly, to give you an example of how you might go about building a composting recipe, you could look at the materials that you have that you want to compost. So we have grass clippings, leaves, and vegetable waste. You would estimate the amount of carbon to nitrogen that material has. So I've got some kind of general examples here. You'd add it all up, and in this case, in the example we have here, I have 87/3. So I go back to my middle school math and I do a little bit of simplification of this fraction to get 29-to-1. So again, it's an estimation. You're using judgment. I almost never use this carbon to nitrogen ratio. I tend to just go with this 3-to-1 volume. Other things to consider: particle size is extremely important in the rate of decomposition and the rate at which you complete the composting process. The smaller you can get those particles going into the pile as you're building it, the quicker you're going to yield compost. Moisture. At the home scale, this is something that's often overlooked. When I'm a gardener, I go out and I water my raised beds. I'm thinking about watering my compost as well. You want to have your compost pile watered perhaps once, maybe even twice a week during the hot summer conditions. You want it to feel damp, but not saturated. So you have to monitor that over time. And to maximize your composting process efficiency, you're going to have to think about water. Key thing as well is oxygen. At the home scale, you're going to be needing to turn the piles frequently. The more you turn them, the more you're going to yield a quick breakdown. So you can get by and not turn piles as often, but you're going to find that you have a slower breakdown of those materials. If you have trouble with your compost piles, there are lots of resources out there, and I'm going to quickly share a couple of resources and then kick it over to Malarie, but there are lots of resources that can help you troubleshoot. I just stole this little infographic from some master composters, and it shows you, if you go around and you answer the questions, is my pile's too dry and too dusty, it gives you some things to think about and some steps to take to remediate that. So encourage you to go out and do a little bit of research, and it's easy to find some resources to help you have success with your home composting. I have to do a quick little self-plug. I teach the Central Oklahoma Master Composter program every September and early October. We're not taking any registrations this year, but if you are interested in learning more about composting, specifically more on the small scale, we have this 6-week course that is every year, starts in September. We're in the middle of it right now, but I would love for you to reach out to me and talk about joining me next year for this class. It's a 6-week class, and we basically scale the Compost Mountain through this class as well and get from small scale all the way up to the large scale with emphasis on the small scale. There are a lot of great resources. At OSU, we have what are called fact sheets. You can go to this web address, facts.okstate.edu. You type in any term you're interested in. In this case, let's say you typed in vermicomposting. It would take you to web pages like this where you can read publications from our university, extension publications that will give you information. If you want to print them or share them or see them in a PDF form, you can click over here on the left. It will take you to PDF versions of those fact sheets. Like I said, we have dozens and dozens of fact sheets on composting. Another thing This is a hidden gem of a resource. The Oklahoma Compost Conference has an awesome YouTube channel with a great number of videos. If you're on this call today and you use YouTube, I encourage you to go over to the YouTube channel and subscribe to this Oklahoma Compost Conference YouTube channel. Last couple slides here. Our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel at OSU is also a good one to check out. Oklahoma Gardening is actually the longest running gardening television show in history. It's been airing consecutively since, I think, 1970. If you go to YouTube and you type in Oklahoma Gardening and then you search internally, we have many dozens of composting videos that you can check out. Great resources for people getting started with composting. That's all I have. I would love to connect with you in person or via email or via social media. You can check out what we're doing here in the Oklahoma City metro area on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram by taking out your camera and scanning these QR codes. And I would love to stay connected with you through that. At this time, I'm going to pass it on to Malarie, let her pick up from here and talk to you about some of the uses of compost.
All right, let me see if I can do this without breaking everything. Okay. Awesome, thank you, Josh and Mark. I'm gonna kind of go over some of the benefits for the landscape. Once you have this compost, what you can do with it. But before I get started, I did want to give a shout out to Josh too. Happy birthday. Virtual cupcakes for you and everybody else, because that's easy and cheap. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about what I do and why I'm here talking about this. I work for the utilities department, and we provide water, wastewater, and solid waste services to a large community. We also provide water to 18 communities and other districts. We have 6 water supply reservoirs and over 3,900 miles of pipeline that delivers water to over 200,000 homes and businesses. And just kind of to put that in perspective, in 2019, the average amount of water that we were pumping was about 92 million gallons. So we're producing a lot of water. And we have in Oklahoma a long history of drought. And this graph just shows our statewide annual precipitation. So anything above the line is higher than average rainfall, and anything below it is less than our average of about 34 inches. And so water conservation, water use efficiency, it helps to prepare our lawns and landscapes for dry and drought situations, which can be kind of a drain on our water resources because irrigation is a demand on our system. And so it helps to, keep our peak demand down and only use what you need in the landscape. So I kind of, thought about this as, what are your landscape goals? So to think about what your goals are and what your purpose of composting in your landscape is before you get started. So if it's to reduce waste going into the landfill and you're kind of lazy like I am, then you might be producing a little bit less usable compost. But if you're using hot compost and you've got a lot of compost to use in your lawn, then that's very useful for you. I've also talked to a couple other people that get, meditation value and a connection to nature and the environment. Maybe it's an excuse to get some alone time in these days of quarantine when we're, trapped in the house all together. Maybe it's to put the trash out less often, which was my primary goal whenever I started composting. Or maybe it's to improve soil quality, which is what I'm going to talk about today. So soil improvement is really the foundation for water smart principle. And so you can have a pretty and tough landscape. And I always move soil improvement to the top of this list because I think it's the most important piece to get started with. So I'm really happy that Josh started it off with a definition of what is compost, because I kind of wanted to talk about the definition of soil. And soil is just the cover over the earth, and it's made up of mineral and organic components. And it's a mix of those organic matter water, and air, and versus compost, which is decomposed organic material. And soil really does a ton for us in our daily lives that we kind of take for granted. It cycles nutrients. It's a medium for plant growth. It helps filter our water, and it's a really good home for beneficial organisms. It's also a really good history teacher and a source material for construction and medicine and art. So our expectation of a soil might be this long, deep soil profile, this beautiful A horizon at the top with organic matter. But our reality, our soil reality might be a little bit different story. So especially in our typical urban environment, where soils have been highly manipulated to build our homes and structures in different buildings. And so that perception really is reality. So if you're like Gwen here and you're struggling with your lawn and landscape, it's probably best to start with a conversation about your soil rather than trying to irrigate that soil more and more and more, which is what we see a lot of times. So urban soils are highly disturbed and compacted, and it really destroys that soil structure. So you start out with this construction activity. We scrape the native topsoil off, take away the vegetation. You have a lot of erosion and compaction happening. It increases that bulk density, which decreases the water infiltration rate, and it ultimately takes out a lot of that organic matter. And so it leads to what we see in our landscape, which is plant stress, higher nutrient runoff, soil loss, and ultimately just an unhappy person or unhappy homeowner because they want to have a good looking landscape. And so it all kind of comes back to that organic matter in our soil holding those soil particles together. So I actually asked a couple of people what soil improvement means to them, and a lot of the responses that I got were add fertilizer, just till it up, or just completely just get rid of it, just take it all out and replace it with something new. And so some of these, can be helpful in some situations, but a lot of the times it's more work than is necessary. So what soil improvement, should mean is, oops, I think I just stopped sharing there for a second. Hopefully you can see my screen there. Yell at me if you can't. So what soil, should mean is that we need to protect it, add organic matter, plant diverse landscapes, and think about it as part of a soil system. So it can take 500 years or more just to create an inch of soil. And so the first step is really to protect it. We need to protect it where it is in place, so that we don't lose those nutrients and source of organic matter. So that means a lot less of that soil glue that's keeping the soil particles in place. Whenever you start losing soil to erosion processes, you're losing that soil's organic matter. And so once that glue is gone in the soil, it's just more susceptible to erosion. So when we talk about, soil health and soil quality, it comes back a lot to that organic matter in your soil. So whenever that organic matter decomposes, it adds back to the soil and increases the nutrient and water holding capacity of the soil. You have an increase in that soil aggregation, better soil structure, and it really helps to stabilize those soil particles so that they're not so susceptible to erosion or compaction. And just to kind of put that into perspective, desert soils typically have about less than 1% of organic matter. And in Oklahoma, we have about 1 to 3% of organic matter. And I would say in a lot of urban environments, it might be on the lower side, and a lot of tilled, agriculture lands, it's on the lower side. So really building up that organic matter is important to making sure that we have what we need in terms of nutrient and water holding capacity. So what does all that mean? Well, for an urban, soil, to fast track that addition of organic matter, it's really easy to incorporate compost for a healthier soil. This also helps support, what Josh was talking about, plant life and soil microbes. So I was just kind of curious about the impact of adding compost to the lawn. So I did this very anecdotal 3 sample site test just to see kind of what the results look like. So the new home build site, so I had 3 sample sites, a new home, 1995 with 3 compost applications, and then a relatively undisturbed wooded site. So for the organic matter results for the new home site, it was about 1.29%. For the older site where I had added a couple applications of compost, I was at about 2.27%. So I was actually really surprised at the increase in organic matter. And then I had a wooded site that I tested, and that was 1.87%, which makes sense because you're having more cycling going on in that natural wooded site. And you also have a lot of organic matter that's held up in the trees and the shrubs that are in a wooded area. So increasing the organic matter content from 1 to 2% would increase the volume of water to about 3/4 of a gallon per cubic foot of soil. So that makes a huge difference when you talk about capturing rainfall on your soil. So I want to spend just a minute to talk about soil testing. I know a lot of the time soil testing is kind of in reference to fertilizer and putting on fertilizer, but I think it also applies to even if you're only using organic source materials. It's easy, if you're using any kind of manure-based compost, that you can still over fertilize your landscape. So for soil tests, it's best to separate your yard by zones of use. So your lawn should be tested differently. And you're going to take a soil sample from the surface to a depth of about 6 inches from 15 to 20 locations. You're going to mix the samples in a clean bucket and fill a soil sample bag. That's about 2 cups. So you can also use a Ziploc baggie and take it into the extension office. And so you're going to repeat that for each area of your landscape and drop it off at your local extension office. And I've put a link to all of those extension office locations there at the bottom. And so you can do a routine soil test for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And you can add in an organic matter test to that too if you're curious to get a baseline of your landscape for your organic matter for your lawn. So not all composts are the same, obviously, and Josh kind of talked about those considerations of what's going into your compost. And so whenever you're considering using it for your lawn or landscape or applying it in your lawn or landscape, make sure that you're keeping some things in mind in terms of where you sourced your material. You can also look for the U.S. Composting Council Seal of Testing Assurance, STA, and there are some local people who sell STA tested compost. And then also, keep in mind the organic matter content, the moisture content, the C to N ratio, nutrients, pH, and if it came from anything that would have soluble salts or metals that could potentially build up in your landscape. So how to apply that to your landscape, there's a couple different ways that you can do it. One is to just work it in to your lawn and landscape by raking it. You can just dump piles around your yard and rake it in. I tried that for a little while and found that it was very energy intensive, and I'm, again, pretty lazy. So I have another way to do this, which is with a compost roller. And this is just a really easy way to add compost to your landscape too. So you can just roll it out and in a more uniform way. And this is a little bit easier on your back, I think. So generally you can till in soil, compost in soil, and I see that a lot is to till it in. I don't usually like to till because it's hard on the soil structure, which takes a long time to develop a good soil structure, and it also can be really hard on the soil microorganisms, and it's also you're bringing all of those weed seeds up to the surface, so you can have a lot of weed seed germination. And but if you have a really tough spot that you feel you have no other option, and you're going to be adding in compost and just essentially restarting that landscape, then that's fine too. And just keep in mind that this doesn't happen overnight. I know we can be a very impatient society, but this is one of those things that takes a little bit of time, and you don't want to just go dump out a whole bunch of compost on your yard at one time. It's a little bit longer approach to that. So another way to do this is to aerate and chop dress with compost. This is actually a picture from the Malarie Gardens. They do this pretty frequently for their large lawn, where people kind of trample in the area around where they do exercises and things, and so it gets pretty compacted. So they'll come through and aerate that great lawn and then top dress it with compost, and so they kind of get that quick benefit of adding compost. It's a little bit quicker to incorporate into that soil profile. So I also wanted to talk about soil and soil biology. Soil should be alive, and we tend to sterilize our urban lawns and take out that living component of the soil, and so it really reduces water movement down through the soil. And all of those bugs and those micro and macroorganisms, they're working together to create those macropores for water and air to move. And so all of those different microorganisms have different jobs in the soil, and they're breaking down different types of materials. And so it's all working together to help beef up and create that quality soil. So if you dig a hole, you shouldn't be surprised or freaked out whenever you see worms and different kinds of organisms. So you want to see that. So if you just go out into your yard and dig some holes, and that's what this is. And if you guys were here with me, I'd be throwing soil at you. And so this is something I really like to do, is just go out and dig a hole and look and see what's going on. Do I have a living soil, or is there something I need to add or think about doing to help increase that biology? So the same microorganisms that are responsible for compost and breaking down that organic matter are also in your soil doing a lot of those same jobs. So bacteria, you have the most of that organism. Actinomycetes is what gives soil its earthy smell, and it helps to break down a lot of those tougher materials that Josh mentioned. Fungi, they break down the dead plants and animal material. The protozoa, they live in the actual water droplets, and all of that works together to help break down organic material. And so adding in different types of compost helps to beef up those different micro activity in your soil. And so you want to have a very diverse biology going on in your soil so that you can break down the most amount of organic matter. So the next thing is kind of off topic of compost, but not of organic matter. So if you plant a diverse garden in your landscape, you're going to have that varied organic matter in a more natural way. So as those plants, grow and take up nutrients and die, you're getting that added benefit of that organic matter in your soil, assuming you either compost it on site or you leave it to naturally decompose. So other you know, there's other benefits of plant diversity. You have that biology activity, the ecosystem services, you have the varied root structures that increase those pore spaces. And then you can ultimately, hopefully reduce the dependence on chemicals to maintain a yard, you know, that you may not even go out and hang out in. And so you get, you know, the benefit of caterpillars and butterflies, and the monarchs are going through right now. And so adding in that plant diversity helps pollinators, but it also helps the activity in your soil. So kind of the results of that is you don't have that variability in root systems, the poor water infiltration because of all that compaction, and you might be missing some of those cycling critters in your landscape, and so you're not breaking down as much organic matter in your soil. Whereas if you have a little bit more diversity in your landscape, that biology might feel a little bit more at home. Those micro and macro organisms are going to do more to create pore spaces. Those variable root structures are going to help add in a little bit more pore space for water and air to flow. And then also you're going to have that added benefit of additional organic matter in your landscape. So soil really is a dynamic living ecosystem, and what we do with it impacts our local soil ecosystem, and we can either make that a good choice or a bad choice. And so adding compost and other organic matter sources, it really helps to speed up those natural processes that we already have in play. And so it's really important to kind of think about what we can do with that compost. And, you know, we all like to do vegetable gardening, and things like that is something why people move to using compost, but it's also beneficial in our lawns and landscapes too. So I put my contact information if you have any other questions, and I will go ahead and turn it back over to Mark.
Yes, thank you so much, both to Josh and to Malarie. And we've had a few questions come in for you all to answer. And I think you can, Josh, come on back to us so we can see you, and you all can decide who wants to answer, or both of you give answers to these. So yeah, let me stop sharing yours, unless you need to keep sharing, Malarie. Yeah, there you go.
All right, I'll take a look at some of these questions here. The first one regarding, it says, I've read that tumblers aren't the best because they limit the amount of microorganisms that can get into the bin. Is this true? If so, would you recommend adding finished compost to jumpstart the microbes, or even just do vermicompost in tumblers? So good question. I make it a habit of adding a little bit of finished compost as an inoculant of sorts to piles that I'm starting. Certainly, if you are in an enclosed system, you may have some limited, you may limit some of the micro and macroorganisms that would naturally make their way to your pile from the environment. I would say that microorganisms are much more likely to be in there, carried with the plant material, with the soil on the root systems and things that you might be composting. I think where you're going to have the most limit is with the macroorganisms in an enclosed system. You're probably going to have less of worms. You're probably going to have less maybe soldier fly larvae, things like that. But that would be my quick answer to that question. I think compost tumblers are a great option for many people, but like I talked about in my presentation, every method, every system of composting, while it may have its advantages, is going to have some disadvantages as well.
All right, any input on that, Malarie, or do you want to head on to the next one? Use of compost tumblers. Has anybody tried vermicomposting in a tumbler style? Does that work?
I have not tried vermicompost in a tumbler. We had a very low-tech tumbler. We had a trash can that we drilled holes into that we would kick around the yard. That was our low-cost tumbler. And we didn't tumble it very often, maybe like a couple times a month. And I think that because it had a lid and it was kind of it would get hotter quicker, and so we had a little bit faster compost. And it, you know, was pretty easy to just roll it around our yard every once in a while. So that worked a little bit better. I'm not sure in terms of the microorganisms, but it did kind of heat it up a little bit quicker, and we just would open it up whenever it would rain and get that natural rainfall in there. And so it worked pretty well for us.
Good. So I think we will jump in to the next one. If there's follow-up questions, attendees, you can feel free to type them into the Q&A feature. But the next one from Rosalind, do you all know what the current Oklahoma County laws say about water capture? So she gets about 1,000 gallons of water each rain and was thinking about using swales in the landscape, but doesn't know exactly what rules govern that. So do you all have any input on that?
I'll let Malarie lead off. I don't know of any specific rules in Oklahoma County that are governing the capture of water. A lot of people do it. I do know that municipal ordinances sometimes will dictate what you can do in terms of in front of your house, but I'm going to let Malarie answer that one.
So in Oklahoma City, I believe, and I could be wrong on this, but I believe it's you can have 2 50-gallon barrels, rain barrels in your front yard, and then anything in the backyard. And it also is dependent on your HOA. If you have a HOA, they may have different rules. But in terms of bioswales, I don't think there's anything limiting you on that type of capture, and it's better for our watersheds if you are maintaining that water that's landing on your property. And so from that perspective, I think bioswales and things like that are there's nothing against building those. And those are typically a city ordinance, so you may want to look at, you know, if you're not from Oklahoma City, if you have another city you're in, checking out your city ordinance is usually the ones that kind of set those rules.
Yeah, thanks. And the next one up, this person does not want to necessarily compost themselves, but would love to utilize compost to do all of those things that you all talked about, from soil health and other reasons. So are there local vendors, or how do you recommend finding a good local vendor for compost?
That's a great question. There are a lot of local vendors, and I would say more and more all the time as the demand for quality compost is increasing. I think there are more people getting into the business, but some of our great sponsors of this conference provide compost, and garden centers and other companies around the metro area are great places to purchase compost. You can purchase it in bagged in some cases, and a lot of times in bulk you can purchase, as well as some of the municipalities around. I'm not sure exactly how they handle the sales of those, but I know many of our metro area municipalities also have composting operations that serve homeowners as well.
Yeah, so I do think we can name some, right, since they're vendors. So I know City of Midwest City, and Paul, who's helping with some tech, is here on the call and could maybe mention that. But like you said, municipality, City of Midwest City has their own composting facility and helped sponsor this program. So we'll mention that you can pick it up from them if you're there, as well as vendors that make some different mixes of compost and soil, like Eleva Soils and Prairie Dirt Solutions, who are some of our vendors, as well as other garden centers, like you said, Josh. Any other thoughts on that, Malarie?
I think those are all, there's a lot of good options around the city. I don't produce enough compost to use in my landscape, and so I buy it by the truckload from a local person, and so that's, you know, that's kind of the way I choose to do that too. So I also use a little bit of it in my own compost pile to kind of help kickstart it too.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, and Eric, an attendee and compost committee person, just said that we should mention Fertile Ground also one of our in-kind sponsors, and they do some community composting, and you can also purchase some from them that they've composted here locally. And just to point out also in the chat that Derek has pasted in the OKC Municipal Code chapter that details the rain barrel requirements. So let me make sure that everybody else can see that as well, in case you're curious about that. And Brady, also with Midwest City and on our committee, says that for Midwest City residents, $20 per cubic yard for the compost you can get that they've been producing. Yeah, thanks for that extra info. All of you sending that in the chat. All right, next one is straight to you, Mallory. So if you were planting diverse plants to increase the organic matter in soil with more root systems, do you think you still need to add compost? Does that still add to soil health if you're already doing that diverse planting? Go ahead.
That's a good question. I would say it depends, because that's always the answer, right? Definitely, I would take a soil test, but especially in an urban environment, if that's where you are, adding in compost is usually the best idea, and it will help to increase that organic matter in the soil. It also depends on the type of plant material that you have. A lot of our native plants, they prefer a lean soil, and so they're going to perform better for you if you have that native soil going on. But I think adding a little bit of compost in there can help with your plant material also, and it, especially in an urban environment.
And we had a couple come in from chat, so let me jump over there to make sure we get them instead of just ones in the Q&A. I'll have to scroll back up to it. Tanner, if you're seeing it before me, please let me know. How should I start vermicomposting? What's the easiest on-road to start a vermicompost setup?
I can take this one. There are a lot of ways you can start vermicomposting. If you want to go the absolute easiest route, you hop on Amazon or go to a garden center, and they sell vermicomposting units that are ready to go. You buy the worms that you need and all the bedding material, and there are instructions online. Like I mentioned earlier, you can go to our fact sheet resources page, facts.okstate.edu, and we have several fact sheets that walk you through how to build a vermicomposting unit. But it can be as simple or as complicated as you want to make it. So if you're wanting to start really small, you can buy a plastic tub at the store and start with that and vermicompost in that, or you can build a large a bin. And so really, depending on the size and scale that you would want to jump into, if you're wanting to vermicompost at home, you can find a solution that's going to meet your needs. And you can also purchase finished vermicompost from a lot of suppliers around the metro area as well. Anything on that, Mallory, that you want to say?
Yeah, that's what mine is, a very low tech vermicompost bin, and I like it because it's closer to my kitchen, and so I can put my kitchen scraps in there a lot easier than my compost pile. Again, the laziness factor comes into play, and it's just a bin that we had starter coconut coir. You can also use nearly finished compost, works well as a bedding material, and then also brown paper, newspaper, and then just drilling holes in it. You can collect basically the water out of it and use it as kind of a beefed up fertilizer too. I don't do that. So that's, another option too for the vermicomposting. But I've really enjoyed mine, and I've been really surprised by how easy it's been. And it's also really quick, which I like. It produces really quick compost or vermicompost. And so that's probably my, that's why I like it the most, honestly. And you can do it all year. In the wintertime, I don't have to get out there in my overalls or anything. I can just go out in the garage and throw my kitchen scraps in there. So
yeah, I have to agree with you, Mallory. Vermicomposting is one of my favorite things. I actually have a bin in my office at work, and then I have a bin at home under my kitchen sink. And both of them, I'm busy and lazy, and both of them are probably undermanaged, but yet they compost very quickly, and they just do their thing, and it's very easy to manage and yield some really good stuff. So.
Yep.
In our last couple minutes, we'll get to a couple more questions. This one relates directly with what you said about how to this person, Lily, wants to know, how do I protect my compost during winter? And of course, you've already kind of referenced with vermicomposting, that might be different than other forms of composting. What do you need to do with the seasons?
Well, so vermicomposting, you're going to have to think about that. I mean, certainly a successful vermicomposting system, the worms that, the red wiggler worms that you utilize in those systems don't prefer extreme winter conditions. They're going to be happiest when soil temps are, somewhere upwards of 50 degrees probably. And so as you get cold winter conditions, you're going to slow down those worms. You may even they may even die or at least have their populations decrease. So you can insulate them if they're outdoors. You can put straw bales or cover them up if we're talking vermicomposting. If we're talking a traditional compost bin with other materials, if you have enough volume and you have the right balance of materials, you can compost through the winter and continue that process. And there's not a lot that you would have to consider. You might consider covering the piles and things to keep them from the weather, but for the most part, the considerations for winter would probably be specific to vermicomposting and other types of systems like that.
And then the last question, or 3 or so questions, kind of relate to each other, and that is about kind of types of compost. So differences between compost created from yard waste versus from biosolids, or do you have to be careful about the grade of compost you're using for lawn application versus garden application? Talk about maybe the different types of compost that you're producing or buying to use for different applications.
So I would say definitely you have to be careful on the grade, and you don't want to introduce any kind of compost in your lawn or landscape that has residual herbicide or pesticides in it. You don't want to be adding Bermuda grass, weed seeds to your flower beds or vegetable garden. And so you want to make sure you're using, in that regard, a hot composted material. And you can, if you're really concerned about it, you can purchase the kind that's STA certified. That's an easy way to know that, it was already tested, it met that criteria. That's probably the best way in terms of making sure you're getting something that doesn't have those weeds and that the herbicides have been composted out of it. Do anything on that, Josh?
I totally agree with you. Knowing where your compost is coming from, certainly purchasing quality compost if it's bagged or in bulk. If you are going to be composting yourself, the hot composting process is going to be the way to go to try to prevent any weed seeds. If you're bringing in materials, this is a big thing we see. If people are bringing in materials from, say, a farm setting, there are some herbicides that are sprayed onto pastures that can carry through the digestive system of horses and cattle and go into their manure, and then they can be residual in compost for a couple of years and can cause some adverse effects. So certainly paying attention to that, knowing the materials that you're getting and utilizing in your compost pile.
All right, thank you all again so much. We'll respect people's times and cut it off there, although you've both shared your email addresses. So if you all attendees have some questions for either Josh or Malarie, feel free to send those. The Oklahoma Compost Conference has an email, info@okcompost. Did I say that right? OklahomaCompostConference.org. Why am I losing track of our website? There's too many websites that we've thrown. OklahomaCompostConference.org. You can send it to that. It is okay. Thank you, Roche. And you send it to all attendees to save me. Info@okcompostconference.org for any other general questions. And for those of you who had registered for all the sessions, you get to partake also in our Grounds for Discussion coffee chat, which will take place Friday, October 30th at 4:20 p.m. And we will be able to get to any questions there that we didn't get to here, or use some of the discussions from this week and the future sessions to further that discussion that we're going to have Friday, October 30th. And just a reminder that we'd love for you to visit the other sessions and join us. If you didn't sign up already, you still can. And those are October 15th, that's a Thursday at 12 o'clock noon Central Time again for mid-scale, that's community composting, community gardening. with Councilwoman Nikki Nice and Latasha Timberlake. And then October 22nd, kind of the large scale agricultural equipment, machinery construction with Edwin Blosser of Midwest Biosystems. And then October 29th, medical marijuana and composting panel led by Jason Huffaker of Eleva Soils. So we hope you can join us for one of those, or even if not, and this was your main interest, we'd love for you to check out our website and the resources there, or follow us on social media. And we thank all of our sponsors again, and our two speakers, Malarie and Josh. You all have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.